very much. And can I just start by saying that I think it warms the cockles of my heart to hear that Yvette and Jess are going to be leading in government, when we get into government, to end male violence against women and girls and to ensure that we have the legislation and the enforcement that we need. So that is such a positive thing to hear, that those two really outstandingly strong women from Yorkshire and Birmingham are going to be leading the way. So that's an excellent start. As Tonya says, I chair the Home Affairs Select Committee. So every time we're in that committee hearings, I see how sex and women's oppression as a sex class impacts on some of the biggest and most complex areas of public policy, including the criminal justice system and the immigration system as well. And Jess is absolutely right. Just passing laws does not mean to say you're going to solve the problem. You have to have the enforcement and the follow-through. Now, of course, sex and gender cut across every single area of government policy. And that's because, as we all know, the material reality of biological sex and the firmly entrenched ideas and expectations of gender are fundamental to who we are as people and how we organise as a society. Now, of course, as already been mentioned, Labour has a very proud history of introducing landmark laws to combat sexism and sex discrimination and promoting the equality of women and girls. And I'm therefore really grateful to the Labour Women's Declaration for organising this important event to explore how Labour can drive forward further gains in government. And I just want to briefly set out what I think should be three of Labour's priorities in government for women and girls. Now, one area that's already been spoken about by Jess is about the criminal justice system, which we know is failing victims of sexual violence in particular. And Labour has to address this, and we've got to deliver justice for victims. Now, the Home Affairs Select Committee has been had an inquiry into this area, and we've set out, I think, a very clear, comprehensive sweep of reforms that we believe should be enacted in order to increase the rape conviction rate and provide support to victims. And this includes ensuring that every police force has a specialist team dedicated to investigating rape. It's truly shocking that that is not already the case. We also know we need to improve data collection and accountability of the criminal justice agencies, and we need to establish a dedicated commissioner for sexual violence. And we know that leadership, funding, training and monitoring are all the things that are vital in reforming the criminal justice system so it works for women. And what's also clear to me personally is that clarity and commitment is required in relation to the provision of single-sex services throughout the criminal justice system, from support services to prisons. The need to uphold the single-sex services is necessary to ensure women and girls' safety and dignity, and its provision should be obvious and uncontroversial. So let's be very clear in our commitment to that. The second thing I just want to talk about briefly is on reproductive rights. Labour has to put an end to women being jailed for having abortions. Earlier this year, as we all know, a woman was sentenced to over 2 years in prison for having an abortion after the legal time limit. She was prosecuted under Section 58 of the Offences Against the Persons Act, a piece of legislation dating from 1861, and that carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. And while, thankfully, these are rare occurrences, we know there are many cases actually in the pipeline on this. It is wrong that any woman should face jail for ending her pregnancy. And let's be clear, decriminalisation of abortion does not mean deregulation of abortion provision. Time limits and other rules would still apply in any new regulatory regime. But what it means is that women would no longer face the threat of criminal prosecution for terminating a pregnancy. And Labour, I looked actually what Labour was saying in our MPF statement that we've agreed. And I just want to read this to you. Labour believes that abortion is an essential part of healthcare which is highly regulated and should not be subject to custodial sanctions. Labour will provide parliamentary time for free votes on modernising abortion law to ensure women do not go to jail for getting an abortion at a vulnerable time. So when we get into government, we need to make sure that the Labour government is held to that promise. And the final thing I just want to talk about is commercial sexual exploitation. Labour has to take on the pimps and the pornographers. If we're really serious, we are really serious about combating violence against women. As the Home Affairs Select Committee is currently having an inquiry into human trafficking, what we found is that demand from men who pay for sex is driving a very lucrative and prolific sex trafficking trade. Commercial pimping websites on which women are advertised for prostitution operate openly and freely, while men who sexually exploit women by paying for sex enjoy impunity. So as I've said many times in Parliament, I personally believe it's imperative that we criminalise pimping websites and paying for sex, decriminalise individuals who sell sex, and instead provide them with support and exiting services. To end the trafficking and sexual exploitation of women and girls, we must end the demand for it. And on pornography, which is filmed prostitution, Labour must crack down on the rampant abuses and harms of this trade. And as the APPG on commercial sexual exploitation set out in our report on pornography earlier this year, at a bare minimum, we must force pornography websites to verify the age and consent of every individual who features in pornography on their platform, give individuals in pornography the legal right to withdraw their consent at any time, and to that at any time to that content remaining online, and address pornography in legislation and policy as a form of violence against women and girls, because that is what it is. So just to conclude, we need new laws, we need new approaches, but most of all, I think we need courage. And I just want to quote from Millicent Fawcett, who said, "Courage calls to courage everywhere, and its voice cannot be denied." And that's how Labour can champion freedom for all women and girls. So thank you for listening.